I didn't want to miss this trade. Welcome back to Haynes on Hoops. This is Quentin Haynes. I wanted to talk about the three-team deal between the Atlanta Hawks, Boston Celtics, and the Brooklyn Nets. The deal had Kristaps Porzingis going to the Atlanta Hawks. You had Terrence Mann in the 22nd overall pick going to the Nets, and you had George Niang in a second rounder to the Boston Celtics. I think we kind of know the order of importance there, or the order of intrigue, but let's just go through it. It starts with the Nets, right? You get the 22nd overall pick, use it on Drake Powell. The Nets' overall draft philosophy seemed to be getting the high upside guys. You had 5 first round picks. You took 5 shots at the dark. And, I'm not going to criticize them for that. So the thing that I do want to criticize them on, did you know Terrence Mann has like 3 years and about $50 million left on his contract? He's getting like $15 to $16 million each of the next 3 seasons. I didn't know how bad that contract was, even though he was fine in Atlanta as a role player. But like, no, that's a bad contract. And the Hawks using that pick to dump that contract, as well as you essentially flipping Niang to Boston for Porzingis, was a good use of their assets, to be honest. So the Nets, I think, are the weakest team of this trio. They didn't really trade anything out, and they got a pick back to use and throw a shot in the dark in place. Overall, a good use of their cap space. Terrence Mann's a fine role player. I think at that number, he's a little bit too much for someone to come trade for mid-season. I don't think he changes your fortune enough to be worth that contract, but he'll get baskets for the Nets, right? And that's perfectly fine. And he was born in Brooklyn, so it's always cool to see Brooklyn players go back home. I think that's cool. The Celtics, with this trade, they are under the second apron. I think they're under the second apron by about $4.5 million. Gives them more flexibility, the ability to aggregate trade players in a trade, gives them some money they can send out in trades now. I think that is probably the biggest part of the trade for the Celtics side. They used their draft picks. They drafted Hugo Gonzalez and I believe a French player in the second round. And those guys seem to be players that probably get stashed for a year, which is cool. And I think more importantly, this kind of preserves some of the flexibility leading into the return of Tatum and that era of basketball, right? They do have some things they got to figure out. They can trade some players. They can consider Anthony Simons extension. There are different things for the Celtics here moving forward, but essentially they took 2 players who were pretty good for the championship team, key players into the championship team, especially on the defensive end, in Holiday and Porzingis, and turned it into Simons, Niang, and 3 second-round picks. I don't think the Celtics are done. I think the Tatum injury does throw some things off in terms of what their future are, but I don't think they'll trade like Derek White. I think Jaylen Brown's staying. There was talk about Anthony Simons potentially being available during the draft. I'm curious to see if he's available in this trade market. I think because of the second apron and because of teams trying to be creative, getting around that and the flexibility they have for future seasons, a 20-point per game scorer in the backcourt of Simon's caliber, I think is someone that could warrant some potential interest. So I think the Celtics are going to play it out, see what they want to do from there, and maybe Simons is on the move. Maybe Sam Hauser could be on the move. Maybe a Peyton Pritchard could be on the move. It is interesting to see what the Celtics are going to do to kind of revamp this roster in this, what I call a gap year. And obviously, we finish with the Atlanta Hawks. I didn't see the team that would trade for Kristaps Porzingis when I discussed it in the Drew Holiday Anthony Simons trade video, but the Hawks make a ton of sense here, right? Porzingis, for all of his injuries, is still a very versatile piece. As a 4-man, he can space the floor. I feel like even though we've gotten to the point where there are smaller power forwards or smaller players playing that big wing role, Porzingis and his ability to kind of back you into the basket and score, that's when he gets the most value there, right? And he can still pick and pop, hit some threes. Defensively, when he can, he's still a good rim protector, still a good defender. Elite size and can make things sticky for opposing offenses. So I think you put him on that Hawks roster. You have another asset for Quinn Snyder in that defense. I think he starts. So I think the Hawks are going to start with Trae Young, Dyson Daniels, Zachariah Risachet, Jalen Johnson, and Kristaps Porzingis. And then you bring in Onyeka Okongwu for those lineups where you want to do double bigs as well as kind of preserve Porzingis. I'm kind of interested in what the Hawks do from here, right? The biggest thing is that by trading Man and trading Niang, they didn't really jump in terms of cap space. They barely made a dent into that number. I believe they added about $4.8 million. So they can still re-sign someone like Karis LeVert, who I think at this stage as a sixth, seventh man is perfectly fine, right? And all of a sudden you're looking at this Hawks roster. You have your big six. You got a guy like Karis. They drafted Asia Newell from Georgia last night, on the first night, round one. I think he's a fine backup big, and he's someone who you can kind of put in the old Onyeka Okongwu spot. They have guys like Muhammad Gee. They have guys like Vic Krejci. They have different kind of weird, interesting players off that bench who are still pretty young. So I'm curious to see how the Hawks kind of handle things, right? Whether they try to add, maybe bring back Larry Nance Jr. and Karis LeVert. Maybe they bring back one or try to sign somebody else. It depends on what they really want to do here. I am a fan of what the Hawks have done so far. They also got the 2026 first round pick, the better pick of New Orleans and Milwaukee, in trading from 13 to 23. I think the Hawks are moving good. I'm suddenly interested in the Eastern Conference in that top six race. We are now talking about teams like Detroit, teams like Atlanta, maybe Indiana, since Halliburton seems to be lost for a year. What does Boston do now that Tatum's going to be essentially gone for most of the season? It's going to be an interesting race to see who gets up there. I think after Cleveland and New York and Orlando, I'm going to put Orlando in that top three space just because I think health, as well as Desmond Bain, and they got Jace Richardson. So you kind of added to what you needed, right? You needed more shooting. You needed more outside presence. And I think that has allowed Orlando to take a step forward for me. The Hawks have kind of added a key piece here. You don't really spend a lot of money, so I'm very interested to see on what they do. I wouldn't be shocked if they finish top six. I liked them last year. I think everything they have on this roster makes sense. You have that star in Trae Young. Now you have Jalen Johnson and Kristaps Porzingis. There's going to be lineups where you're playing both, and just things happen. And Trae Young is going to have so much spacing and creatability. I think this team's interesting to watch on offense, and I think Quinn Snyder, over the last 12 to 18 months, have slowly gotten the pieces he's needed defensively that you saw he thrived with in Utah. I like Dyson Daniels' second year. I think Daniels has warts as an offensive player, but he was a high level, if not one of the top defenders in the league this past year. And it's because of his defensive events, his ability to create steals, produce pressure. And I think we didn't look at two players for the Hawks that we didn't look at in the second half of the season. Risachet, who sort of kind of figured it out, started hitting threes, started playing off, a little bit, showing a little bit more off the dribble. We have to see if that's Mickey March or if that's true progression as a player. And Onyeka Okongwu, who really looked good in the second half of the season, and is someone who, if the Hawks even lend an idea that he might be available, I wouldn't be shocked if he got traded. And I wouldn't be shocked if teams actually made a huge jump for him. I think the Hawks should keep him because you now have a nice trio of bigs, and then you even have a nice couple of set of backup bigs that work. I would just keep everybody and figure out what you got. But Onyeka Okongwu and Risachet had big second halves last year. You have guys like Porzingis, Young, and Johnson who can kind of operate and score and do things offensively. And then you have the defensive pieces. Risachet's coming along defensively. I think that part of his game is continuing to steadily improve. Dyson's an all-world defender. Porzingis, when healthy, is a really good defender. You're starting to see the Hawks put everything together. And even though I don't think they're true contenders per se, I do think that this team is good enough to kind of fix things and figure it out, right? They're going to be an interesting team to watch in the regular season. I don't think they had. I think they'll be a piece short, but maybe that comes in the form of a role player they had in free agency. We'll see. So all in all, I think the Nets in that rebuilding cycle did what the Nets do, which is add a bunch of players, add a bunch of draft picks. The Celtics kind of reset everything now that they're moving past the Tatum dominant bigs era, and now the Hawks are kind of moving into their own space. And between Jalen Johnson, Dyson Daniels, Ricochet, you have young players and you have established guys within Porzingis and Young who I think are ready to win more games and have some more success. So overall, this was an interesting trade. It happened before the draft, and then the draft happened, so I couldn't jump on it right away. But I think overall, for what each team was trying to accomplish, they all did a good job. I think coming away from this, the Hawks are going to be the more interesting team to watch moving forward. So yeah, guys, that's my take, and thank you for listening. Catch you on the next one.